Welcome to Capitol View, our weekly look at the happenings inside and outside the Illinois State Capitol. I'm Jennifer Fuller. Our guests this week are Kent Redfield, the Emeritus Political Science Professor at the University of Illinois Springfield, and Alex Stegman, State House reporter for Illinois Public Radio and WBEZ in Chicago. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me.
We talked a lot last week about the Illinois State Fair in Springfield, which has now wrapped up, and campaigns are turning their eyes to far southern Illinois. The DuQuoin State Fair opens this weekend and runs through Labor Day. Alex, I wanted to get started with you. I know you spent a lot of time out at the fair in Springfield listening to the messages of the candidates and campaigns. Now they turn their eyes to DuQuoin, much further south in the state. How do you think messaging and how the candidates respond to things will change?
Well, when you're looking at the Springfield State Fairs and the DuQuoin State Fairs, they're both really agriculture based, and they're both there to put forth the idea that Illinois is an agriculture state. Agriculture is the backbone of this state, and that was made very clear by both candidates at the Springfield State Fair. And I imagine that kind of thing is going to continue, but there is a little bit of difference because, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, in Illinois, politicians have to change their messages, whether they're, and they don't have to, but typically they do, when they're speaking in Chicago versus when they're speaking in Springfield versus when they're speaking down in Carbondale, Marion, DuQuoin. I don't think that the main message that they're trying to get across, that we support agriculture and we're going to do what is best for the backbone of the state, I don't think that's going to change that much, but there may be a little work that they have to do to, I guess, tune their message to their specific audience.
Kent, how important is it to make sure that the message is tailored to the audience you're speaking to?
Well, you're obviously are playing to local media that is attuned to, Southern Illinois, Central Illinois, the suburbs, Chicago. And so depending on your campaign, you want to make that message resonate, show that you are, if you're not one of them, you understand them in terms of wherever you're speaking. You also want it to play into your narrative. And so, Pritzker is deep, this week, deep downstate. And so he wants to talk about downstate, but he also wants to say, hey, I'm down here in Southern Illinois. That's not a hellhole, and I want to represent the whole state. And he wants that to contrast that with, Bailey, who is, on his home turf and can talk agriculture, but, Bailey doesn't need to solidify his downstate base. He needs to expand his electorate in the suburbs, and if including suburban Cook, and then if possible in Chicago. So, where they're trying to solidify and where they're trying to expand is different for each candidate.
We'll get to the comment that you alluded to in just a little bit, but Alex, you mentioned that both fairs are about the state's focus on agriculture and its need for agriculture when it comes to the Illinois economy. This week we saw J.B. Pritzker and Darren Bailey face off in a forum hosted by the Illinois Farm Bureau, and they talked a lot about their agriculture policies, but it was a very different conversation. We see the difference between what J.B. Pritzker sees as the next step for agriculture and energy in many cases, and what Darren Bailey says is what farmers need from the state legislature. Does that message need to be solidified, or do you think that they've got the backing that they need there?
Well, as Kent mentioned just a moment ago, Darren Bailey, when he does forums like this with the Illinois Farm Bureau, he is on his home turf. And you could see that during the forum when he seemed to be very in his elements. He seemed to be talking directly to people about things that they're actually going through right now, whereas Governor Pritzker, he seemed to know what he was talking about, but it was also very political speechy, if that makes sense. It seemed like a lot of his press conferences in the past, when he's trying to appeal to organizations and appeal to the people who he's talking to, and that was no different yesterday. But at the same time, when you ask if people have made up their minds necessarily, I think a lot of people have, but at the same time, J.B. Pritzker is the governor, and he's the governor of an agricultural state. So it's his job to go in front of these folks and tell them that he understands, that he at least is capable of handling what they need. And he both he and Darren Bailey did show that yesterday, I think.
Kent, when the two of them, as Alex said, are making very different pitches in areas that they are going to and visiting, and particularly in front of different affinity organizations, how much does J.B. Pritzker need to play to downstate Illinois, to rural Illinois, to agricultural Illinois, if most of the votes that he will get are going to come from the city of Chicago and the suburbs?
Well, he needs a certain amount of, there is part of the Democratic vote does reside in downstate, and most of it is in the urban areas of downstate: Rockford, Quad Cities, Peoria, Bloomington, Normal, Springfield, Champaign, Urbana, Danville, the Metro East. I mean, there's an awful lot of rural territory that is going to be very strongly Republican, but by showing attention to downstate and having an inclusive message, that helps him in terms of his overall narrative that, I'm the one, we're the ones with the big tent, and plus we're mainstream, we're not extreme. And so, he does need, he can't abandon downstate, but he wants to craft his message in a way that resonates with that larger theme about, and he takes advantage, obviously, of the incumbency. He gets to take the picture by the butter cow. He and his wife get to battle over who buys the champion steer, and that's all great publicity that doesn't, you don't have to pay for, and it's a good story, and it makes for great pictures, in local and statewide media.
One of the things you alluded to earlier is some messaging, some comments from State Senator Darren Bailey in his campaign talking about the problems involving crime in the city of Chicago. And he has gone so far as to call Chicago a hellhole. And then he walked those comments back, and then he came back and said, yes, there are these problems, and it is, in fact, a hellhole. Alex, what are those comments doing in terms of garnering any sort of support from voters?
Well, as it relates to supporters, you might imagine that a lot of Darren Bailey supporters who are particularly focused on crime in Chicago and across the state, they agree that Chicago is a hellhole, or at least has hellhole qualities. But the problem is he is not generating much support in Chicago with those comments. Now, you'll hear Darren Bailey and Stephanie Trussell saying that when they walk in the Bud Billiken parade and when they walk the streets of Chicago, when they talk to people, that they agree with him that it's scary and there are things that need to change. And I think he's really leaning into that. He's really leaning into the fact that, yeah, I know what I'm saying, but I'm going, and this is what people are actually telling me. But on the other hand, you have a contingent of people who do not think that Chicago is a hellhole. And in fact, there was a recent, I think it was within the last week or so, that there was a pretty big push on social media to show pictures of Chicago in this great light and be like, oh gosh, what a hellhole. And, so there's been a bit of backlash, and I don't think he's doing himself any favors by continuing to go down this road, even though he believes that this is the thing to do. But what he needs to remember is that there are people in the suburbs that also like Chicago. And the thing about Chicagoans is that if you tell them that Chicago is a bad place, even if they believe it, they don't want somebody else telling them that. So and this kind of extends to suburbanites too, because people from the suburbs are from Chicago. They have a really they have a really strong connection to the city, and they just don't like it when somebody who they perceive as an outsider tells them that where they live is not good.
The underlying message that he appears to be getting at here is that Chicago's mayor and Governor J.B. Pritzker have failed when it comes to combating crime in the city of Chicago and across the state. Kent, is that message getting through, or are people fixated on that one comment?
Well, it is, there is, obviously violent crime at any level is a problem. And people realize that we have to do better in terms of dealing with violent crime, particularly in certain areas of Chicago and other urban areas. But where Pritzker probably has the advantage when have dueling campaigns is, when you talk to Bailey, what's your solution? One of his responses, well, we have to get people to obey the law better. And ultimately, you're going to see from the Pritzker campaign, commercials that remind people that Bailey was one of the key supporters of a movement to essentially kick Chicago or Cook County out of the state of Illinois. So what's your solution? To abandon Chicago, and that's not going to play well. That will, you come up against people's regional pride and their identity with their, with where they live. So you have to get, more specific. And when we get into things like cashless bail is going to take effect, next year, people's eyes generally glaze over, and it just reinforces whatever narrative that they came into the discussion with, rather than getting to a discussion about what actually should we be doing and what can the governor do when the city of, he doesn't run the Chicago Police Department. Obviously the mayor does, and the governor can't unelect the mayor of Chicago. So it's a hard argument to make when you get down to what specifically can you do, and so you retreat back to the rhetoric and the stereotypes, and that's probably not, all you're doing is reinforcing where voters already are.
There have famously been conflicts between heads of the state and heads of the city of Chicago, between the governor and the mayor of Chicago for decades, if not generations. Alex, what do you think that whoever wins the governor's race is going to have to do to try and bring Chicago and downstate back together? You have to govern the entire state. You can't just govern part of it.
Well, I think it's going to be an interesting thing to try to do because, as you mentioned, it's been going on for decades. We've been trying to figure that out for a long time. And I think the key thing to do is just to, and I hate to go back to this, but the thing that you could do right now is tone down the incendiary rhetoric that is pushed specifically toward one region of the state. If we're going to work together as a state, because even though agriculture, I mentioned this before, agriculture is the backbone of the state, but the Chicago metropolitan area with its 9 million plus residents is the economic engine of the state. And the two need to work together. And if you're going to have politicians from one side of the state just completely lambasting, and I don't know if that's the right word to use, but just completely excoriating them and over everything, and vice versa, you have people from Chicago who shout downstate like, you don't understand what we need and things like that. It's just, it's not going to get better. So I don't know if that's something that the governor can do. The governor can certainly set the tone, but it's going to be up to certainly everybody.
There was something that came out this week from Chicago's mayor, Lori Lightfoot, and it's not an attack on a specific person so much as a campaign or even a political action committee. The mayor is accusing Dan Proft's People Who Play by the Rules PAC of changing some video in a campaign ad, actually darkening the video to make her look darker. And she used it in saying that it's playing into racist stereotypes. Proft denies those claims, but Kent, how much is this going to play with an accusation of a truly racist campaign ad, or no, it's not, you're taking this out of context? Is this going to hold any water?
It hurts Bailey, even though it's not his ad, and it helps both Pritzker and actually the mayor, because it makes her look more sympathetic, and she obviously has lots of problems. I mean, if you just visually compare the picture that came from her appearance in front of the Chicago Citizens Club, I'm not sure that's the right title, and then what's in the ad, it is noticeably darker, and the shading is bad, and either that was in the bad old days, that happened all the time. If you had a minority candidate, you did everything possible to make, if you were running against that candidate, to emphasize the racial stereotype. This could have been bad editing, rather than being intentional. But just you hand those two pictures to the man or the woman in the street, they're going to draw a conclusion that's, somebody's manipulated the video. And so, the people that made the ad, the people that reviewed the ad, all of the people within Prof's organization, and indirectly Richard Euland, who is funding that operation, they bear responsibility for, they're either trying to manipulate people with racial stereotypes, or they're incompetent. That's a lose-lose situation in terms of trying to explain your way out of that. And so you have to say, well, who are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes? That's never really a good defense.
Alex, this is yet another example of a week where we're talking about things that are in campaign ads or things that people have said along the campaign trail. And there are a lot of voters standing up saying, you're not talking about the issues that are important to me. You're not talking about inflation. You're not talking about the economy. You're not talking about unemployment. Do you think that the candidates in the next 2+ months are going to get to those issues in any real way, or are they going to stick with what's been working so far?
That is a really good question. I think, at least I hope, what will happen is they will get into those meat and potato, bread and butter issues like you talked about as they continue with their campaign with whatever they think is working. More often, and this actually isn't that new of a phenomenon, more often than not in campaigns, no matter what they're for, you see a lot of rhetoric as opposed to a lot of substance, because people are prone to react to rhetoric more so than they're going to react to, well, this is what I'm going to do as governor. I'm going to fix the roads. I'm going to improve schools. I'm going to do this. No, what they respond to is a creative way to message that, but also attacking your opponent. So politics is a very, very interesting game, I would say. And I would really hope that, like I said, I would hope that all of these issues come to the fore, but in terms of whether that's going to be helpful to the campaign, I don't know if that's a good strategy.
In the areas where, say, Governor Pritzker needs to pick up some votes, downstate in very rural areas, you still see him going out, as you see incumbents do, saying, well, here's a check for this, here's some money for infrastructure, for a new school, for things like that. Does that move the needle anymore?
It does move the needle in that you've got something concrete, literally and figuratively, that we're doing for downstate. And so you have an ad with a downstate citizen talking about, this is what we've done for the airport. This is what we've done for the roads. The governor, cares. And when you're an incumbent and you've got a record, which Pritzker has, we're in better fiscal shape. We can argue about whether, how great it actually is, but it's certainly better than where it was. We're doing things. And so you're going to see Pritzker running that. Here's what I've done. We're going to do more. But there's also going to be that backdrop of Republicans. Bailey is extreme. DeVore, the candidate for Attorney General, is extreme. All Republicans are extreme. And so whatever the problems are, you can't trust these people who are unqualified to, for public office to solve your problems. And so, that's going to be that underlying narrative about, and so you don't have to explain how you're going to fix things if the other person is not qualified to hold office. And so, again, this is campaign 101. You're talking about, here's the great and wonderful things I've done. And whatever the problems are, my opponent can't help you because they don't have any answers. They don't have any programs. They're too extreme. And, Bailey has a much more difficult task running against an incumbent with a record when Republicans are in the minority in the state. And right now, not only does he have a significant financial disadvantage compared to the governor's war chest, but the main spending is anti-Pritzker, coming from, people who play by the rules, the Independent Expenditure Committee, that never mention Bailey's name. It's all an attack on Pritzker. You don't come away, I want to vote against Pritzker, but they don't tell you who to vote for. And so it's not ideal in terms of, if right now the money's not being spent effectively to build Bailey as a candidate.
Kent, I want to stay with you on that campaign finance conversation. When you talk about, $1 million here, $1 million there, and, suddenly we're talking about real money, as that cliche goes. But we've seen Governor Pritzker put a lot of money into his own campaign and a lot of money into campaigns for Democrats, both here in Illinois and across the country. Senator Bailey has been, as you said, the beneficiary of Dan Proft and Richard Uihlein and, a lot of other Republican donors. But at the end of the day, how is a voter supposed to get past what they're seeing and hearing in those campaign ads and get to what these candidates are actually about and what they'll be able to do if elected?
Well, it is hard if you don't see them in depth, in person, either personally or through debates, through interviews. If all you are getting is the message run by modern political campaigns, it's very hard for the voters because, the people that do this for a living understand that, and it's certainly been shown, it's much easier to drive up your opponent's negatives than to increase your positives. And so these are, there's a lot of messaging out there about how terrible the other person is. And it's very difficult in a 30-second ad, in a 60-second ad, TV or radio, to get any kind of substance. You're dealing in very broad narratives. And some of it's fine. I mean, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? That's a legitimate question that voters can get around. And, is this person empathetic? Does he, if he isn't one of us, does he understand us? Those are reasonable things for voters to take into account. It's very hard to get the whole of what's involved with running the state of Illinois. But you tend to, all of this money, the way it's spent, tends to drive out the substance, and it makes it very hard for voters to get to, what are the important things to me, and which of these people are really going to make a difference for me, my family, my region, my state. It's hard.
Alex, that job tends to fall to people like you and to people like me, those journalists who are tasked with finding the truth and reporting the truth. Do you find it more difficult today than maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, I find it more difficult today, if for no other reason other than there are some political candidates who are taking this strategy of running their campaign entirely through ads, and they're not talking to reporters at all. They're not doing debates at all. So initially, when I'm first pondering this question, I thought to myself, well, let's go back to what we all learned in middle and high school about how to research things, like using primary sources and who is this person, what are their credentials, and like looking into that. And I would say, let's do that. But then I realized, well, that's kind of not the strategy anymore. As Kent said, the people who are running these campaigns, they're good at it. They're very good at this, and that's why they do it. And that's why you're seeing a lot more candidates just not talking to us anymore, not doing the public forums and public debates and getting in front of voters, because there's a chance that they're going to have to go off message, and they don't want that.
And Kent, as we wrap things up with just about a minute or so remaining, voters have a lot of times talked about voter fatigue. Now we have this other layer of accusations of voter fraud, false allegations that the 2020 election was stolen, for example. With Illinois' system, with a state board of elections and county clerks running those elections, are there allegations that need to be addressed? Should voter confidence be high here?
We have a very good election process. It's well run, well organized. The State Board of Elections does a great job. The individual county clerks do a great job. And so there have not been a lot of allegations of massive fraud or, that, and certainly nothing like we had historically. There's really two ways to look at it. We've got a professional board running this that is a bipartisan board. It's not an elected statewide official like it is in much other states, with very good laws. There's a lot of security built into this. Now, I mean, you can say one of the reasons we have such a good system is it was built on a bipartisan basis by two political parties that don't trust each other. And so the way to make sure that your opponent doesn't cheat is to design a system where it's hard for anybody to cheat. And so that's kind of a left-handed way of saying, we have a pretty good system that gets, when we make changes, they're vetted, to make sure that we don't have any loopholes. So I think you can have confidence in what we're doing in Illinois.
We'll continue to look into this issue and others here on Capitol View. Alex Stegman, Kent Redfield, thanks so much for joining us.